Hey everyone, I'm Selena Hill, the Deputy Digital Editor at Black Enterprise, and I hope you're enjoying the Women of Power Tech Summit. Next up, I'll speak to two dynamic tech leaders about how they've merged their work in technology with their passion for social and racial justice to create meaningful impact in their companies and the communities they serve. First up, we have Aerica Shimizu Banks, who is a tech policy expert, inclusion innovator, and the founder of Shiso, a consultancy firm rooted in racial justice and social impact. We also have with us Maureen Jules-Perez, who is the VP of HR Technology at Capital One, where she leads the global software and systems engineering team and works closely with human resources to implement transformative initiatives using a technological and cultural perspective. Thank you so much, ladies, for being here with us at the Women of Power Tech Summit.
Thank you for having me.
For having me.
Absolutely. So I want to start this conversation by giving our audience a brief overview of your career journey in tech. So Aerica, before becoming a social entrepreneur, you founded Pinterest DC's office and led federal policy. You also spent 6 years at Google and worked on environmental policy issues in the Obama administration. Tell us what sparked your interest in working in tech.
Well, thanks so much for that question and that introduction, Selena. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I sometimes say I didn't necessarily choose tech, but tech chose me. So I set out to be a public servant. I wanted to major in environmental studies so that I could work for the government at the federal level in environmental policy. And when I got to college and started that major, I learned about environmental justice and how no matter what policy issues we take on, we must consider the impacts on people and people who have been oppressed and marginalized most. Because when we work for solutions for the most oppressed and the most marginalized, we actually find solutions for everyone. And so that is what led me to environmental justice, which is the acknowledgement of the role racism plays in environmental policy and what we can do to fix that. And so I went into the Obama administration literally the day after I graduated from college, so eager to work on these environmental policy issues. And I started off as a fellow at the Department of Transportation, then went to the Pew Charitable Trusts, which manages over 50 campaigns related to the environment in their government affairs team, and then was honored to be an appointee in the Obama administration working on environmental policy through the Office of Management and Budget. But I had to leave to go to grad school because I had been privileged to receive a full scholarship for a master's in environmental policy. And I graduated in the middle of the government shutdown of 2013. So my position was no longer filled by appointees. I desperately sought to return to the Obama administration and probably applied to about 70 other places in environmental policy. No one got back to me except for Google, based on an online application I made for a very junior level role. And that was my entry point to tech. And when I joined Google, I found that there were so many resources, so many tools. And when you have access to those resources and tools, so many opportunities to affect the lives of everyday people. And so I found a new way to serve the public through Google. And that is when I started to leverage technology for good and really for the purpose of my people. Starting in 2015, I was selected to be the Black Small Business Liaison for the DC area. And through that, we were able to bring businesses, Black-owned businesses, to about $1 million in revenues and contracts with companies like Google and others, and provide resources and access to tools to thousands of Black-owned businesses. And so that's what really cemented me on the path that I am on now. And that is how I found the way to really use technology instead of letting it use me.
Yeah, what a fascinating journey. Thank you so much for that, Aerica. Maureen, you have expertise in executing enterprise cloud transformation strategies, innovating employee experiences and digital workspaces, and advocating strategies for more diverse talent in the tech industry. But when and how did your journey in tech begin?
Again, thank you for having me, and I'm excited for this conversation with Aerica and yourself, Selena. It goes way back. I was born in Brooklyn, but raised in Miami, so I have multiple perspectives. And in Brooklyn, we were a very affluent family, business owners, et cetera. And once we moved to Miami, different experience. It was more, I call frugal. There was just a lot of things we had to do for ourselves that we didn't have before. So I've been rich and I've been poor, as I say. And while I was in Miami, in the inner city, in an all Black school, my teacher, Mr. Maley, was my physics teacher, said, have you thought about engineering? Have you thought about technology? And I didn't know what that was. And so you can imagine in Miami, struggling and having someone say, there's more you can do beyond what you see today. And so I give a lot of credit to someone who saw something in me that I didn't even realize. And I believe in that. I believe we're all here to support each other. Ultimately, I became an electrical engineer, went to school, double majored in satellite communication and in power and energy. Did that for a few years, and around year 5, year 6, I realized I didn't even like the job. And so coming to that realization, I got into software by removing myself in a role that I didn't like. And I started to re-experiment, retry, what is the software space? What does it mean to make things with software and technology? And then I fell in love. 24 years later in the game of tech, what I realized is you're always supposed to be learning, growing, and also stay curious. And so I give credit to Mr. Maley for opening my eyes, if you will, but it was up to me to continue to try different things out, which I encourage even the young people out there. It's okay to not like something. That's a sign that there's something else better for you. And so I've always just had fun in tech. Now, when it comes to advocating for more diverse talent in tech, that was a bit of I call a nonlinear road and not an easy path, because when I started to look up having fun in tech, I realized I was the only one. And then I knew that we weren't done. And so I love your statement, Tech for Good, Aerica. That is my mantra. Everything I do going forward in applying tech will be for the good, whether it's for our community, whether it's for the work environment that we work in the culture sense, or in a workspace sense. So my current job as lead of People Tech at Capital One is we think about how technology makes our work life better. And so we're in the new normal in what we call a hybrid workspace. But my team supports, whether it's workspace, think about a conference room or a huddle space, all the way to HR systems, and whether you're starting as a new employee or there are things that are going on in your life, a life moment like I'm getting married, a lot of those technologies we support.
Thank you so much for that, Maureen. And I'm so happy you gave examples about how you are using technology for good. Both you and Aerica did a great job at that. But, there is still a diversity crisis in the technology space at large. As a result, so many technology products that are produced either don't serve anyone or enough of us, and sometimes are actually harmful to marginalized groups. Aerica, what role do Black women play in addressing the prevalence of intersectional oppression in the technology space and moving the industry towards a more ethical and inclusive direction?
Well, Black women have been at the fore of making technology accessible and making technology serve the public good since its advent, especially if we think of the current iteration of technology in terms of computers, in terms of engineering. All we have to look back to is the story of the women behind Hidden Figures, who were the real life supercomputers behind NASA's missions into space. And they were Black women, and their history was hidden from us. So we have played a role in this from the beginning, whether we've wanted to or not. And despite the disparity and the adversity that those women faced at NASA, they had the choice to put their skills to use in service to the public. But there are so many Black women that did not have the choice to inform the technology that shapes us today, including our vaccines. And that is Henrietta Lacks, I think, as a perfect example of that. A Black woman who suffered from ovarian cancer, and instead of finding a cure for her, when she died, her cells were harvested, and her family was not notified, nor were they compensated for the developments that resulted from her cells. And thanks to her cells, we have so many vaccines, so many treatments for cancer, including the vaccines that many of us have used to survive this pandemic. So we owe a great deal of debt to Black women, not just within our community, but globally. And that legacy continues. When I left Google, I felt, to be quite honest with you, because I feel like I can be honest with y'all, I felt a bit of survivor's guilt. I'm going to be real about this. There are very few Black women in tech, and it's not because we are not qualified. It is not because we do not have the credentials. It is because of racism. And it is because of, as Moya Bailey coined, misogynoir, which is the intersection of racism and sexism, and the intersectionality is identified by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw that produces a specific kind of violence against Black women. And that is especially obvious in tech. And so I felt that even when I was at Google and I had a great experience, I knew as a mixed race Black woman with light skin who went to Oxford, my situation at the company was very different than other Black women who perhaps did not appear like me and did not have the same credentials as I did. And I heard those experiences and I tried to do what I could within the company to address them, but there was a limit to that. And so when I left and was recruited by Pinterest because of my work in the Black community, I saw an opportunity as a leader in that company, designated to open their office in DC, to be their head of federal policy, to be their face to the US lawmakers. I saw that as an opportunity to elevate Black women and Black people in technology and work not just on our inclusion, but real equity. Instead, I was faced with harassment and discrimination based on my race and my gender. And so I came forward about this situation, this discrimination last year. And I'm really proud to play a role as a whistleblower in tech, revealing the racism and discrimination in the industry. And I have to say again, there's this survivor's guilt of not paying the consequences that so many Black women and so many women generally face for speaking up about these issues. In that, I've been able to start a career and thrive, and I've been able to speak my truth without many repercussions. But in order to make sure that that doesn't happen, that risk is not as great for so many other Black women, I worked with Ifeoma Ozoma on the Silence No More Act, which was just signed into law last week by Governor Gavin Newsom in California. So now, no matter what your race, gender, ability, whatever happens to you, if you are harassed on the job in California, no matter what documents you sign, you are allowed to tell your story and warn other people so that they may not face this experience. Because sadly, we know throughout the industry, this still happens. And in fact, I suggest all of you read a brilliant Black women's article in Wired that came out yesterday by Sidette Harry called Listening to Black Women, which talks about all the ways throughout the last several years, Black women sounded the alarm, not just about the harms inside tech companies, but the harms executed against our people in the world, on social media, the harassment we face and the rise of white supremacy. So Black women, we have led the way from the beginning and we will continue to do so.
Excellent points. Thank you so much for that, Aerica, and also just the work you're doing as a whistleblower and using your voice to advocate change. Maureen, what are your thoughts on how structural racism persists in technology, and how are you using tech to change it?
First of all, thank you. And Aerica, thank you for the work you're doing. I love it. So I'm still processing that. And I love the framing of real talk. So let's get real. As a Black woman in tech, as an engineer who just wants to play at tech, but I don't have that option, right? We have to recognize that Black women will always wear multiple hats. I mentioned I was the head of People Tech, which does corporate technology across Capital One. I'm also the Blacks in Tech accountable executive, where I'm making sure that not only are we supporting the BIT community, we call it Blacks in Tech BIT, and making sure that we're highlighting the great talent that already exists within the company. We're also looking to recruit and also think about what does it mean to thrive as a Black engineer in the industry. And so there's still a lot of work to do. One of my favorite things I like to call out is we need to both show what's working and what's not working. And so my work will not be done until the next Maureens of the world are able to have an easier time than I am. Now, again, ironically, I feel like I'm in a privileged space because I'm an executive now, right? I've been from the bottom to the top. And that wasn't easy. And a lot of the times it was alone. And so I think part of what we can do is continue to be the voice for the voiceless. Think about how we felt. You know, Eric, I'm only relating to when you were at Google, but in my past companies that I've been in, there was a moment where I would hold back. And that holding back is what we call self-editing, right? It is very taxing. And a lot of Black women in technology or other industries are doing that today. How can we truly be allies for each other and continue to support each other? And so I'm a big fan of creating spaces and forums for that. The other way, we mentioned technology, is also creating platforms for us to communicate, for us to connect. One of my favorite organizations, we write in the code, and they have a program called Black Wings. These are Black women engineers in college connecting with each other today. Imagine if I had that 20 years ago when I was in school. And that's powerful. We need to continue to support organizations or what I call opportunities to create spaces for us to connect so that we can help each other. Not just talk about what we went through that didn't work out, but what we have as opportunity to make it work for us and for us to thrive. And then meanwhile, like we said, we have to do this together and looking at other groups, other intersectionalities that we can also voice while we're at it. So I mentioned that we need to apply tech for good. Now is the time to do that. This is the best time to do it because we're not alone. We don't have to be alone. And if we are, we have, I call platforms and technology to give us capability to connect. And so I encourage people to look up, look sideways, look anywhere you can to find each other so that we can do this together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Maureen. And, as we continue the conversation about using technology for good, we saw so much change, especially last year in 2020 with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, the pandemic, and then the election. How would you say these pivotal moments in history have inspired innovation and changed the tech industry?
Well, I'm happy to start in that. I think it's always the call of the people and the will of the people that motivates the greatest innovation in our society, whether that's the innovation of inventing a new product or the innovation of new policies that provide the resources and access and opportunity for the next generation to create the next business, the next product, the next game-changing technology. And we are on the cusp of that now. We have this opportunity. We saw this during the civil rights movement. We've seen it in past movements. It's always about the will of the people. And Black people, especially in the US, have always been at the fore of that. And so I think the time now is not just about making pledges. We saw so many companies, so many products make pledges in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And where have they been with those pledges? It's time to hold these companies accountable to the pledges they made at the beginning of 2020, because it's been over a year now. We need to see action and we need to see change.
Maureen, same question.
Can you repeat the question? Because I kind of heard a breakup, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to know, how the pandemic and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement last year really inspired innovation and changed the tech industry.
Absolutely. Last year, I think last year was just a lot going on with the pandemic, financial crisis, health crisis, and in the civil unrest. I personally am still learning from that. So I just want to put that in the room. When I look back at what we did at Capital One, we also, as part of the Blacks in Tech group, had a virtual summit. Usually we would come together every year. Imagine hundreds of beautiful Black technologists coming together and both networking as well as learning. And we didn't have that opportunity last year. So we had our summit, it's an annual event, and we mix it up not only with tech, but a lot of cultural conversation. We talked about social unrest. We talked about inequities and systemic challenges. And I thought that was just a marquee event in my mind of what we needed, and we need to continue that. But we also talked about commitment to the Black community, whether that was in volunteering, whether that was investing to, I call bridge the digital divide. A lot of folks still did not have computers and access to the internet. So we did a lot of initiatives there to help in DC and other local areas. And then one of my favorite things we did is we also looked at what do we need to do to continue to make sure the Blacks in tech community thrive? So there's a bunch of new programs that will focus on career development, on creating more patent opportunity. Because by the way, there's a lot of ideas we've created that we just have not gotten credit for. That's a whole nother conversation. So we have this thing called Patent Palooza, where we've tripled the number of Blacks in tech submissions in patents. So things like that is what I think came out of last year, not just some of the processing and things that we need to sort of continue to heal around, because again, the work is not done, but also making sure we're taking the opportunity to continue to shine the light on the talent and the skills we have to either thrive where we are now or what's waiting for us in the future. We are part of the future. So I'm continuing to say the future of tech is Black. And so I want to just make sure that everyone knows that you have a chance now, whether you're a technologist or not, to contribute to our future. So no stopping there.
Yeah, so the work is far from done. Thank you so much for that, Maureen. You know, when we look at women like yourselves, Aerica and Maureen, we see these two dynamic tech leaders who have overcome so many obstacles and really made it to the top of the industry. But what needs to be done to create more Aericas and Maureens of the world and to prepare young Black girls to become the leaders of tomorrow in the industry?
I think ironically, it starts outside of the tech industry. It's the culture, it's the media, it's what our children are seeing day one, right? I mentioned in middle school is when I found out about technology and engineering. What if we made sure that the storytelling we have in books, which I know a lot of new books are coming out for the Black community, but having more and making sure that we're pausing some of the, I call social media news cycles, and having new spaces to tell those stories and have our children, have our community rally around how do we have more of that produced for our people, right? That's one view. The other thing I mentioned before is ideas around technology, more startups, more businesses, and what I call more partnerships between Black businesses to allow us to have that foundation. It's all about building equity. It's all about building that story and also having those products on the shelf right next to the other one. So I think we're talking about it, but having that truly be in our day-to-day, in the DNA of how we live every day, I think is huge. And then yes, applying some tech for good there.
Absolutely, Maureen. And I would love to talk with you offline about Patent Palooza, because when I was at Google, I actually led equity initiatives, especially for Black inventors on the Google patent team. So I would love to touch base about that. And you raised such a good point in that we often don't get the credit for our ideas, and we definitely aren't compensated for it the same way, because racism is structural in this country. It's not just the microaggressions that we face. It's the way hiring is conducted. It's the way rubrics are created to reinforce inequity as opposed to increase access. And it's the way that companies skirt responsibility and accountability for their lack of representation. And we need to look beyond representation. You know, I am so honored to think that little girls, you know, want, as you mentioned, Selena, that we want the next generation of Aericas and Maureens. That's such an honor to be named in that way. And yet there need to be more than one of us, than two of us, than names that we can relate to, but entire groups of people. We need to get beyond singular representation and singular figures in tech, because one, it's a lot of responsibility to be tasked with representing an entire race of beautiful, multifaceted, multidimensional people through one person, through, you know, your one executive or your one manager at the entire company. And that's not fair to that person. But also, you know, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. Let's be real. And so it's not fair to us to also have to go through one gatekeeper from our community. Instead, I always advocate for national levels of representation within companies, because as we've learned and as the data has shown, the pipeline problem is not real. We have tech majors, we have STEM majors at HBCUs, and they do great. We have Black people enrolled in tech majors in community colleges at our Harvards and Yales, et cetera, and yet they're still not getting jobs. So what is the issue when you have the credentials, when you have the skills, when you have the experience? A friend of mine, her husband is a Black executive at a startup in the Bay Area. And before that, he was at one of the big 5 tech companies. And yet it took him over a year and a half to find a new position at his executive level when his other white colleagues were able to seamlessly transition into new companies and roles. And while he, yes, still made it, the barriers he faced are indicative of that, there must be something else going on. If all other things are equal, what is that one differential that's making it harder for him to find a job when all of his peers are able to? And that's what we have to address, and that's what we have to name, and that's racism. And so until we really work to address the institutional and structural racism that exists in our country and recognize that it's not just the people who experience that racism, our role to address it, but really it's the people who enforce that racism and their responsibility to address it, we won't have structural change. But in the meantime, we have to work in parallel lines on addressing things structurally, but also addressing things within our community. And one is recognizing that technology is not just for everyone, it's becoming necessary for everything. And the difference between a tech company and any other industry is getting much smaller. And so really every industry is tech enabled. Everyone needs to have access to the internet, access to a computer. As we saw in the pandemic, thousands of children were not able to go to school because they did not have access to the internet. And whose communities do you think were impacted the most by that? And how will society be impacted by an entire generation of children who for 2 years had limited access to learning because of lack of access to Wi-Fi and technology? We as a society will pay for that. So it's all of our responsibility. And while we're working for that social accountability, we must uplift each other and work together as a community. And that's in solidarity with movements that raise awareness of these issues of discrimination. But that's also investing in Black businesses, like Maureen said. You know, despite all the pledges of 2020, VCs, venture capitalists, actually decreased their funding for their investments in Black-owned businesses and startups. And now as more Black people are able to recoup the middle class and rise into the higher ranks of tech and other industries and into that upper class echelon, we need to reinvest into the community. I try to do that through being a board member of 1863 Ventures, which is investing in new majority founders, that's Black and brown founders, based on the promise of the Emancipation Proclamation of 1860.
Oh, wow.
And so I encourage all of you, everyone, to look into that. It supports Black-owned entrepreneurs through education, but also through investment. And it started off as a project to bring 500 Black entrepreneurs to millions in revenue, and they exceeded that goal in years ahead of schedule.
Wow.
And also, I suggest folks invest in Black businesses as angel investors, et cetera. So I realize I could talk forever on this, and I'll stop here, but we got to do parallel work here.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Aerica. We do have to begin to wrap the conversation. But before we do, Maureen, I did want to ask you, what advice would you share with other women who aspire to use technology as a vehicle for social change and impact?
Absolutely. Like I said, we don't have a choice. We have to be where we need to be to help until someone else has that baton. I mentioned I'm the lead of People Tech at Capital One. I mentioned I'm the accountable executive for Blacks in Tech. I'm also the president of Girls for Change, which is a nonprofit focused on Black girls in middle school and high school in Richmond. Why? Because we need to also make sure we're talking about technology at all levels within our community. But for me, I really want to stress on a few things, and I'm just sort of piggybacking what you mentioned, Aerica. Parallel work, but also look at the policies. Look at the systems around you. So if you want to start getting involved as a Black woman in technology, do the research. And like I said, don't do it alone. Find your network, find your tribe, and really explore how you can sort of solve this problem and in tandem with other sort of ideas. So you heard Aerica mention parallel, look at parallel things. That's the best way to get lift across the board. The thing I don't want people to feel is that technology is hard or it's a huge sort of learning opportunity. There are many programs in either in your community or online that you can learn, practice, test. And so just get yourself comfortable. I have a saying, go back and learn how to play with tech. Because I think part of the programming or some of the misinformation is that tech is hard, so therefore it's a barrier. And that is not true. And it is, as Aerica said, tech is everywhere. All companies recognize for them to survive and thrive, technology is part of the deal. So there's no escape. So if you want to get involved, now's the time. You have an iPhone, if you have a computer, if you don't, go to the library, continue to keep going until you feel comfortable in the space. And then when in doubt, go back to school or take a class or so, whatever it takes for you to feel comfortable. And then again, reach out, build a tribe around the problem or the opportunity you're trying to pursue. And you don't have to be the technologist. You can build that team who all have the same passion around that cause or that issue, and then applying that technology as best you see fit. So sometimes I get a lot of questions as an executive or as an experienced engineer, how do I use tech? And I always say, you're already using tech. It's at your house, it's in your hand on the phone. It's more about being aware and being focused about what you're trying to accomplish. And tech can help that. As a matter of fact, today is the best time to play with tech because there are so many ways to learn without having to leave your house. There's so many meetups and groups who are passionate about the topic, who want to teach you. So just allow yourself to be open with a flexible spirit and just jump in. And that's my best advice, is the art of the start.
This was such an amazing conversation. Thank you both again. If you can just let our audience know how they can contact you and follow you in the work that you're doing, Aerica.
Thank you so much for having me again. You can visit me at my website, aerica.co, aerica.co, or on Twitter, Instagram at Aerica Shimizu, ERIKASHIMIZU.
And Maureen?
Sure, and thank you for having me again. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Maureen Jules-Perez, or I'm on Twitter, Mojuan, MOJUAN. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, and continue to enjoy the Women of Power Tech Summit.